Loner Cowboy slept by his dead horse. A native boy tucked a blanket over him at dawn. They say a man without a horse out here is already half dead. What do they say about a man whose only friend lies still beneath him, cold and lifeless? Would you trust a stranger if he knelt beside your grief without saying a word? Would you take a blanket from the hands of someone the world told you to fear? I didn't come looking for mercy that night, but it found me anyway, in the form of a quiet boy with eyes full of stories. My name is Jake Wheeler, and I've been riding alone for 7 years. Not by choice at first, the war made sure of that. I came back from Shiloh to find my ranch burned, my wife dead of fever, and my boy taken by the same sickness. After that, alone seemed safer, hurt less. Boone was different. Found him half-starved in Tennessee, ribs showing through his hide, too proud to beg, but too weak to run. Confederate cavalry had left him for dead after a battle. Wrong color for an officer's mount, they said. Too much white showing. Bad luck. I knew about being left for dead. Knew about being the wrong color for what folks expected, so I shared my last hardtack with him, and he followed me west. For 7 years we rode together. 7 years of him knowing when to stand quiet while I fought old ghosts, when to nudge my shoulder, because I'd been staring at nothing too long. He wasn't just a horse. He was the keeper of my sanity, the witness to my continued existence, when existing felt like more curse than blessing. When the nightmares came, and they always came. His breathing reminded me which world was real. Yesterday changed everything. We were cutting through Skeleton Canyon, trying to shave 2 days off the route to Tombstone. I should have known better. Should have seen how the recent rains had loosened the shale. But I was thinking about the job waiting, the money I needed for, hell, I don't even remember now what seemed so important. The ledge gave way like paper in water. One moment Boone was sure-footed as always. The next he was sliding, scrabbling. His eyes wide with the kind of fear I'd never seen in them before. Not even in battle. I tried to hold him, God knows I tried. I threw myself off as he went down, grabbing for the reins, for his mane, for anything. But gravity's got its own laws out here, and they don't bend for desperation. He fell 20 feet. The sound he made when he hit, it's a sound that carves itself into your bones. Not a scream, just a soft exhale like surprise. I half climbed, half fell down to him. His legs were wrong, angles that made my stomach turn, but his eyes were still alert, still finding mine, still trusting me to make it right somehow. I'm here, boy. I'm right here. My hands shook as I stroked his neck. Blood frothed at his nostrils. Internal damage, nothing to be done. We both knew it. I've killed men in war, killed them up close where you can see the light leave. But sitting there with Boone's head in my lap, watching him struggle to breathe, knowing what I had to do, that was harder than all of them combined. You were the best of us, I told him. My voice cracked like dried leather. The very best. He tried to nudge my hand one last time. Then I used the Colt. Quick and clean, the way he deserved. I couldn't leave him. I know that sounds foolish. Dead is dead, and the desert doesn't care about sentiment. But Boone had carried me through the worst years of my life. The least I could do was sit with him through his first night of forever. The sun went down angry, all reds and purples, like the sky itself was bruised. I sat there beside Boone's body, my back against a boulder, trying not to think about how cold he'd gotten already. How still. In 7 years, I'd never seen him completely still. Even sleeping, he'd twitch his ears at flies, shift his weight, and dream about long runs across open ground. Now, nothing. Just meat and memory. I must have dozed some. Exhaustion. Finally winning over grief. The stars were different when I opened my eyes, wheeled around to past midnight positions. My neck hurt from the awkward angle, and the cold had worked into my bones deep enough to set them aching. That's when I heard them. Footsteps, not boots. I knew the sound of boots on rock, had been listening for that sound for years. This was different, softer, bare feet moving with the kind of care that comes from a lifetime of walking silently. My hand found the Colt's grip without conscious thought. 7 years of staying alive in hostile territory had made some reflexes permanent. But I didn't draw. Something about those footsteps, their size, their careful rhythm, said a threat wasn't coming. Just presence. A shape materialized from the darkness, small, child-sized, moving with purpose but without hurry, like someone approaching a wounded animal, which I suppose I was. The figure stopped about 10 feet away, just at the edge of the dying firelight from the pathetic excuse for a camp I'd made. It was a boy, native from the look of him, though I couldn't tell. Which tribe? Maybe 10 years old, though hunger has a way of making children look younger than their years. He studied me with eyes that caught the firelight and threw it back like a cat's. No fear in them, which should have worried me more than it did. A native child alone in the night, approaching a white man that spoke of either foolishness or desperation or something else entirely. I kept my hand on the gun but didn't draw. We sat there, measuring each other across the fire's glow and Boone's cooling body. The boy's gaze traveled from me to the horse, lingered there with something that might have been understanding. Then he took a step closer, another, moving like smoke, like inevitability. I could have stopped him, should have, probably. Everything I'd been taught said this was danger. Native child or not, out here trust got you killed faster than bullets. But I was already killed, wasn't I? Just hadn't stopped breathing yet. And there was something in the way he looked at Boone. Recognition, maybe. Kinship with loss. He reached the edge of my sorry camp and stopped again. This close, I could see he was thin but not starving. His clothes were a mix of traditional and traded. Deerskin leggings but a cotton shirt that had seen better decades. His hair was long, tied back with what looked like a strip of the same leather. Without a word, without waiting for permission I couldn't have given anyway, he crouched down and began feeding the fire. Small twigs at first, then larger pieces he must have gathered on his approach. Patient, methodical movements that spoke of long practice. The fire grew from dying embers to something worth calling warmth, and still neither of us spoke. Him because he chose not to, me because my throat had closed up tight as a fist. A minute passed, maybe an hour. Time moves strange when grief's got its hands around your throat. But eventually, the boy settled back on his haunches, apparently satisfied with his work. Then he looked at me again. Really looked, like he was reading something written on my bones. And what he saw there must have decided him, because he reached for something I hadn't noticed before, a bundle beside him in the darkness. A blanket, thin wool, worn soft with use, smelling of smoke and sage, and something else I couldn't name. Without ceremony, without permission, he stood and moved toward me. I should have reacted. 7 years of survival instinct screamed at me to move, to speak, to do something other than sit there like a broken doll. But I couldn't. Could only watch as this child, this native child who should have seen me as enemy, draped that blanket around my shoulders with the same care my Mary used to use, back when I had a Mary to come home to. The weight of that blanket nearly broke me. Such a simple thing, wool and weaving, nothing more. But it had been 7 years since anyone had offered me comfort without expecting payment. 7 years since gentleness had touched me without agenda. My hand tightened on the Colt's grip, instinct warring with what? Gratitude? Confusion? The boy didn't flinch at the movement, just settled back to his spot across the fire, adding another stick with those patient movements. Why? The word came out cracked, barely recognizable as human speech. How long since I'd spoken? Days, probably. There'd been no one to talk to but Boone, and he'd never needed words. The boy tilted his head, considering. Then, instead of answering, he pointed at Boone's still form. His hand moved in a gesture I didn't recognize, circular, encompassing both the horse and me, then touching his chest over his heart. I tried again. "You shouldn't be here, your people." He shook his head, a sharp movement that cut off my words. Then he did something that stopped my breath. He hummed. It was a tune I hadn't heard in 20 years. A lullaby my mother used to sing, something she'd learned from her grandmother, who'd learned it from hers. An old song, older than the country. We'd carved out of this land. How could this native boy know my mother's lullaby? The humming continued, low and steady, weaving through the night air like smoke. My hand fell away from the gun without my permission. The blanket settled heavier on my shoulders, and for the first time since finding Mary dead, I felt the burning that comes before tears. But I didn't cry. Couldn't, maybe. That well had run dry years ago. Instead, I found myself talking. Words, spilling out like blood from a fresh wound. His name was Boone, after Daniel Boone. My boy loved those stories. Used to make me tell them over and over. How Boone blazed trails, fought bears, made peace between peoples who should have been enemies. My voice caught. My boy, Timothy. He was 6 when the fever took him. Same fever that took Mary 3 days later. I was in town getting supplies, came back to an empty house and 2 fresh graves the neighbors had dug. The boy listened without moving, his dark eyes never leaving my face. The humming had stopped, but somehow its echo remained, vibrating in the space between us. Should have been there. Should have died with them. Instead, I got Boone here. I gestured at the still form beside me. And we ran, been running ever since. 7 years of running from ghosts that ride faster than any horse. Silence fell again, but different now. Fuller, like the night itself was listening. The boy reached into a pouch at his side, pulled something out. Food, dried meat and some kind of flatbread. He broke it carefully in half, extended one portion to me. "I can't take your food, boy." He thrust it forward more insistently. When I still didn't take it, he set it on a flat stone between us and pushed it toward me with all the solemnity of a peace treaty. My stomach cramped, reminding me I hadn't eaten since... when? Yesterday morning, before Boone fell. Time had gone fluid, meaningless. I picked up the offering, bit into it. The meat was venison, smoked with juniper. The bread tasted of corn, and something sweet, honey maybe. "Thank you." The words felt rusty, unused to appreciation. "What's your name?" He smiled then. First real expression I'd seen from him beyond that ancient sadness. His hands moved in signs I didn't recognize, painting words in the air I couldn't read. "I don't understand." The smile didn't fade. He pointed to himself, then made a swooping gesture like a bird in flight, then pointed at me and made a different motion, something low and steady like rolling earth, flying something and ground. Earth? I was guessing wild, but he nodded encouragement. Then he surprised me again by scratching in the dirt with a stick. Letters, rough but readable. Grow. "Your name is Crow?" A nod. He pointed at me, eyebrows raised in question. Jake Wheeler." I almost added more. My rank from the war, where I was from, where I was headed, but none of that mattered anymore. I was just Jake, sitting by my dead horse with a native boy who knew my mother's lullaby. Crow, if that was really his name, settled back and resumed tending the fire. The night wrapped around us like his blanket, and for the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel completely alone. We sat there as the night deepened, 2 unlikely companions keeping vigil over the dead. Crow didn't speak, couldn't or wouldn't. I never found out which, but his presence filled the silence in ways words couldn't have. He was maybe 10, maybe 12. Hard to tell with the gauntness that touched all children out here, native or white. His clothes told a story of survival. The traditional leggings patched with trader's cloth, moccasins worn thin but carefully repaired, that cotton shirt with bone buttons that must have come from some missionary's charity box. but it was his. Eyes that held me. Old eyes in that young face. Eyes that had seen too much, understood too much. Eyes like Timothy's might have been if he'd lived to see what the world really was. The comparison hurt like a fresh wound, but I couldn't look. Away! Crow moved around the camp with easy efficiency, gathering more wood, banking the fire for warmth without smoke. Every movement deliberate but unhurried. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. "You're alone too." It wasn't a question. Something. In the way he carried himself, the careful awareness of his surroundings, the fact that he was here at all. It all spoke of someone who'd learned to rely only on himself. He paused in his work, glanced at me, then nodded, a single dip of his chin that carried weight like a stone dropping into still water. I wanted to ask more. Where were his people? What had driven a child into the night alone? But the words stuck in my throat, maybe because I already knew the kinds of answers he'd give, the same answers I would. Dead, gone, lost. The vocabulary of the bereaved. Instead, I found myself talking again. Seemed once the dam broke, the flood couldn't be stopped. Boone saved my life more times than I can count, not just from bullets or bad water, from myself. There were nights, especially that first year, when the gun looked awful friendly, when joining Mary and Timothy seemed like the only sensible option. I ran my hand along Boone's neck, still warm but cooling. But I couldn't leave him. He'd followed me out of hell. Least I could do was see him through to the other side. Crow listened, with that complete attention children rarely give adults. He'd settled across from me again, the fire between us, painting shadows on his face that made him look even younger, or older, both somehow. Stupid, isn't it? Staying alive for a horse. Man should have better reasons. Country, family, God. I laughed, but it came out cracked. Lost my country at Shiloh. Saw what men do to each other in the name of causes. Lost my family to fever and God. Well, he and I haven't been on speaking terms since. No. Crow tilted his head, considering. Then he stood and walked to Boone's body. I tensed, hand moving back to the gun, but he ignored my reaction. Instead, he knelt beside my horse and placed one small hand on the still shoulder. His lips moved, in what might have been prayer, though I couldn't hear the words. His other hand made gestures over Boone's body. Not the sign of the cross I knew, but something older. Something that seemed to pull the very darkness down, like a blessing. When he finished, he looked back at me. His hands moved in those signs. Again, and though I couldn't read them, something in their rhythm felt like recognition. Like he was saying, I see you. I see what you've lost. I understand. Your people, I started, then stopped. What right did I have to ask? His people were probably dead, killed by men who looked like me, who carried guns like mine, the great wheel of violence that ground everything to dust out here. But Crow shook his head, as if hearing my unspoken thought. He pointed to himself, then swept his arm in a gesture that seemed to encompass the whole night, the canyon, the stars. Then he touched his chest again and pointed at me. You're saying we're the same? Alone? A nod. Then he did something that nearly stopped my heart. He reached into his pouch again and pulled out a small object. In the firelight, I could just make out what it was. A carved wooden horse, no bigger than a child's thumb, worn smooth by handling, one leg broken off and carefully mended. He held it out to me. An offering, a bridge. I took it with hands that shook more than they had when I'd ended Boone's pain. The carving was simple but perfect, catching the essence of horse in a few essential lines. Some child's treasure carried through. Loss and flight and survival. I can't take this. See, but Crow was already turning back to the fire, adding more wood with those patient movements. The conversation, such as it was over. The gift had been given, the connection made. I sat there holding that tiny wooden horse while my Real horse grew cold beside me and felt something I hadn't felt in 7 years. Not alone. The fire crackled between us, sending sparks up toward stars that seemed closer than usual. Maybe grief did that, thinned the walls between earth and sky. Or maybe it was Crow's presence, the way he seemed to exist partially in both worlds, never quite settling fully into either. I found myself really looking at him for the first time. Not just the obvious, native boy, alone, mysteriously helpful, but the details that told a deeper story. There were scars on his thin arms, some old and white, others newer. A mark on his neck that could have been from rope, the way he never quite relaxed even in apparent rest, always ready to move, to run, to disappear. "How long you been alone?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Crow looked up from the fire. His hands moved to answer, but then he seemed to reconsider. Instead, he held up fingers. 3. 3 years. A nod. Christ. You were, what, 7, 8? The math of it hit me hard. A child that young, surviving alone in this hard country. How? This time his answer was longer. Hands painting pictures in the air I could almost follow. Something about many people, then fewer, then none. A gesture that might have meant sickness. Another that definitely meant soldiers. The army. My stomach turned. I'd heard the stories, tried not to believe most of them, but a child alone for 3 years told its own truth. They killed your family? Not quite a nod, more like acknowledgement of a partially correct guess. His hands moved again, not just soldiers, sickness too, and something else. He made a gesture of people walking away, scattering. Scattered, your people scattered, and you... I couldn't finish. And you were left behind, lost, forgotten, another orphan of America's westward hunger. Crow didn't seem to need my pity. He shrugged, a movement that said, "This is what is. No use crying over spilled blood." Then he surprised me by standing and moving closer to Boone's body. He circled, my horse slowly, studying him with those 2 old eyes. When he completed the circuit, he nodded to himself as if confirming something. Then he began to sing. If the lullaby had nearly broken me, this finished the job. It wasn't in English, wasn't in any language I recognized, but I knew what it was. A death song, a warrior's farewell. The melody rose and fell like wind over grass. Sometimes barely audible, sometimes strong enough to echo off the canyon walls. Crow's young voice cracked occasionally, but he didn't stop. His hands moved as he sang, and I realized he was telling Boone's story. Or what he imagined it to be. A horse who carried his rider through danger, who stood against enemies, who died with honor far from the grass of home. I'd heard native death songs before, usually from a distance, usually right before or after violence. They'd always seemed alien to me, incomprehensible, but sitting there in the dark with Boone growing cold and this child singing him across whatever river the dead had to cross, I understood. Words weren't the point. The point was witness. The point was saying, "You mattered. Your life had weight. Your death leaves a hole in the world." When the song ended, the silence it left behind felt different, fuller, like something had been completed. "Thank you," I managed through a throat gone tight. Crow inclined his head gravely, then he pointed at me and made a questioning gesture. "Your turn," it seemed to say. "I can't sing, never could. Mary used to laugh." I stopped, swallowed. But there was something we used to say, the unit I rode with, when we lost someone. I cleared my throat, feeling foolish but owing this boy who'd sung for my horse. "Here lies a soldier faithful to the end. Here lies a brother on whom we could depend. Here lies a warrior whose battle now is done. Here lies our comrade beneath the setting sun." It wasn't much, doggerel really, but Crow listened with the same gravity he'd given his own song, When I finished, he nodded approval. Then he did something that surprised me even more than the singing. He laughed. Not mockery, a genuine, delighted laugh, like Timothy used to make when I'd swing him up onto my shoulders. The sound was so unexpected, so purely childlike after all that ancient sadness, that I found myself almost smiling in response. "What?" Crow pointed at me, then at himself, then made a gesture that encompassed both of us and Boone. His meaning was clear. Look at us. A white man and a native boy singing death songs over a horse in the middle of nowhere. The absurdity of it, the strange beauty of it. "Yeah," I said. "I suppose it is funny in its way." As the night wore on toward morning, Crow grew more animated. The ancient sadness never quite left his eyes, but something else joined it. A kind of fierce life that reminded me why children survived out here when grown men didn't. They adapted. They found joy in small things. They hadn't yet learned that hope was dangerous. He'd been drawing in the dirt while I dozed fitfully against my rock. When I woke, he was adding finishing touches to something elaborate. I shifted to see better, my body protesting every movement. Too old to be sleeping on cold ground, too stubborn to die. "What's that?" Crow looked up, then gestured for me to come closer. I managed to stand, joints popping like gunfire, and hobbled over to his side of the fire. The drawing was complex, circles within circles, lines radiating out like sun rays, and at the center, two figures. One clearly a horse, the other harder to make out. "That Boone?" A nod. Crow pointed to the other figure, then to me. "And me." I studied the design. There was something familiar about it, something I'd seen before, but couldn't place. "What does it mean?" Crow's face went serious. He pointed to the design, then to his chest, tapping over his heart. Then he stood and pulled down the collar of his ragged shirt. There, scarred into the skin of his chest, was the same symbol. Smaller, cruder, but unmistakably the same. The scar was old, but not ancient. Maybe a few years. The kind of mark that came from deliberate ritual, not accident. "Someone did this to you?" He shook his head, pointed to himself, made a cutting motion. He'd done it himself. Why? This required more complex explanation. Crow settled back down and began a series of gestures, occasionally drawing more pictures in the dirt to clarify. I caught pieces. A father figure, a warrior, death in battle. Crow choosing to mark himself to carry the memory. Your father? Not quite. An uncle maybe, or a mentor. Someone who'd mattered, someone whose loss had carved a hole that needed marking. So this symbol, it means loss, grief. Yes and no. Crow pointed to the horse figure, then to me, then back to the symbol. His hands moved in those fluid signs, and while I couldn't read them precisely, the meaning came through. Not just loss. Connection beyond death, loyalty that transcended breathing. Like me and Boone. An emphatic nod. Then Crow did something that made my breath catch. He reached into his pouch again. How many treasures did this child carry? And pulled out a small knife. Before I could react, he'd pricked his thumb, drawing a bead of blood. Hey now! But he was already moving, touching his bloody thumb to the center of the symbol he'd drawn. Then he looked at me expectantly. You want me to? He held out the knife, handle first, patient, waiting. I'd shed blood for worse reasons, cut men down for causes I didn't believe in, for orders I didn't understand. This, at least, made a kind of sense. A blood oath to a dead horse, witnessed by an orphaned child. Why not? I took the knife, pricked my own thumb. The pain was nothing compared to everything else. I touched my blood to his in the center of the symbol. Crow smiled. That rare, transformative expression that made him fully a child again. Then he began covering the symbol with dirt, carefully, reverently, burying it like a secret, like a seed. What happens now? I asked. He shrugged. but it was a content shrug. The ritual, whatever it was, had been completed. Something had been acknowledged, honored, bound. I didn't understand it, might never understand it. But I felt it, a settling, like a bone sliding back into joint. The eastern sky was starting to lighten, stars fading like dying coals. Soon it would be dawn, and decisions would have to be made. Where to go, what to do, how to continue in. A world without Boone. But for now, there was just this, a man and a boy and a dead horse and a symbol drawn in dirt and sealed in blood. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. "You need to see this." They were the first words I'd spoken in what felt like hours. Crow had been bustling around the camp as dawn approached, gathering things with purpose I couldn't fathom. But when the light grew strong enough to see clearly, I noticed something that hadn't been there the night before. A circle of white stones around Boone's body. Perfect white stones, each the size of a child's fist, placed with deliberate care. They glowed in the early light like a necklace of small moons. Crow paused in his work, following my gaze. He nodded, satisfied, then continued. "His mysterious preparations. Where did these come from?" I knew the answer even as I asked. He'd placed them during one of my fitful dozes. This child who moved like smoke had surrounded my horse with, what, protection? Honor? "Must have taken you half the night to find these." He shrugged, but I caught the pleased look that flashed across his face. Then he surprised me by walking to Boone's saddlebags, the ones I hadn't been able to bring myself to touch, and carefully opening them. "Hey!" But he was already pulling something out, holding it up for my inspection. A single feather, carved from what looked like bone or antler. Delicate work, each barb carefully etched. It must have taken hours, days maybe. "You made this?" A nod. He brought it to me, placed it in my hands with the same ceremony he'd used for everything else. The carving was extraordinary. So realistic, I almost expected it to be soft to the touch. "It's beautiful, but I don't understand." Crow was already moving again, back to the saddlebags. This time he pulled out my spare shirt, the one Mary had mended so many times it was more thread than original cloth. Without asking permission, he never did, he tore a strip from the bottom. I should have protested. It was one of the last. The things I had of hers, her careful stitches still visible. But something in Crow's movements, the reverent way he handled the cloth, stopped me. He tied the strip around the quill end of the carved feather, then fashioned a loop. A necklace, or no, as he demonstrated by tying it to my belt, a talisman to hang where I could see it. "Eagle?" I asked, touching the carving. He shook. His head made that swooping gesture he'd used for his own name, Crow. A crow's feather carved from bone, tied with cloth that carried my dead wife's touch. The sun was properly up now, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and red. In full light, I could see things I'd missed in darkness. Crow's clothes weren't just worn, they were carefully maintained, patched with skill that spoke of teaching. His hair wasn't just tied back, it was braided in a specific pattern that probably meant something to those who could read such things. And the white stones. In daylight, I could see they weren't random. They formed a pattern, a spiral that drew the eye inward to where Boone lay. It was beautiful and terrible, and final in a way that simple death hadn't been. "I need to bury him," I said. The words came out harsh, practical. "Can't just leave him for the coyotes." Crow tilted his head, studying me. Then he shook his head and pointed up, to the canyon walls, the sky, the circling birds that were already gathering. Sky burial? I'd heard of such things. Some tribes left their dead on platforms, letting the elements and animals return them to the earth. That's not our way. But even as I said it, I wondered, what was our way? A hole in the ground? A wooden box? What did Boone care for Christian burial? He'd been a horse. He'd lived free, died free. Maybe the native way was better. Crow seemed to sense my wavering. He walked to me, barely coming up to my chest, and took my hand, led me to a flat rock near Boone's body, and made me sit. Then he began moving the white stones, not removing them, rearranging them. The spiral became something else, something that suggested movement, journey. When he finished, he stepped back and looked at me. "You're saying he's already traveling?" "Don't. Need to bury him because he's gone?" A nod, but more than that. Crow pointed to the sky, to the earth, and to the carved feather at my belt. Made a circular motion that seemed to encompass everything. Here, there, everywhere. Not gone. Transformed. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist on proper burial, on doing things the way I'd been taught. But sitting there in the morning light, surrounded by those white stones and the vast indifference of the desert, I couldn't remember why it mattered. "All right," I said finally, "sky burial it is. If this story moves something inside you, type 'even in grief we're never alone' in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. There's more where this came from." The sun climbed higher, and I knew Crow would leave soon. Everything about him spoke of impermanence, the way he'd appeared from nowhere, the efficiency of his movements, the fact that he'd survived 3 years by never staying anywhere too long. "You could come with me," I said, surprising myself. "I'm headed to Tombstone. There's work there, food, better than—" I gestured at the vast emptiness around us. Crow smiled, but it was sad. He shook his head, pointed to himself, then swept his arm across the landscape again. This was his home, his whole world. He belonged to the desert in a way I never could. "Where will you go?" He shrugged, pointed in several directions. Here, there, wherever. The eternal journey of the displaced. I wanted to argue, to convince him. A child alone in this harsh country, it wasn't right. But then I remembered he'd survived 3 years already. Who was I to say my way was better? I couldn't even keep a horse alive. Instead, I found myself digging in my pockets. Found what I was looking for, a silver dollar, one of 3 I had left. Held it out to him. "Take it. Buy food when you need it." He looked at the coin for a long moment, then gently pushed my hand back. Shook his head. Not refusal of the gift, but refusal of the need. He pointed to the desert, to the sky, made eating, motions. The land provides. "Stubborn," I said, but I was almost smiling. Just like... I stopped. Just like Timothy would have been. Timothy, who never got the chance to be stubborn, to refuse help, to insist on his own way. Crow seemed to hear the unfinished thought. He moved closer, looked up at me with those ancient child's eyes. Then he did something that broke through my last defenses. He hugged me. It was brief, a child's quick embrace, there and gone before I could respond. But the warmth of it, the simple human connection, nearly undid me. When was the last time anyone had touched me with affection? Mary, probably, 7 years ago. When he stepped back, Crow was all business again. He gathered his few possessions. The pouch, a water skin I hadn't noticed before, a blanket roll. But he left the blanket. He'd draped over me. When I tried to give it back, he shook his head firmly. "I can't take your blanket." He pointed to me, to the blanket, then made a giving motion. Done, decided, no arguments. Before he left, he performed one more ritual. From his pouch, he produced a small handful of something. Corn pollen, I realized. He sprinkled it over Boone's body, murmuring words I couldn't hear. Then he turned to me and, before I could react, daubed a line of pollen on my forehead. "What?" He pressed a finger to his lips, then touched his chest, my chest, pointed to Boone. The gesture was clear. We are connected. All of us, the living and the dead, the white man and the native child, the horse and his rider. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he was going. Walking. away with that ground-eating pace that could carry him for miles. He didn't look back. That wasn't his way. But just before he disappeared around a bend in the canyon, he raised one hand. Farewell, or until we meet again. Or simply, I see you. I sat there for a long time after he left, the morning sun warming the blanket on my shoulders, the carved feather heavy at my belt. Boone lay still within his circle of white stones, and somehow that seemed right now. Proper, complete. I should have felt more alone. My horse dead, the child gone, nothing but miles of desert between me and anywhere. But I didn't. The blanket smelled of smoke and sage. The feather caught the light when I moved. And somewhere out there, a boy carried a wooden horse with a mended leg, and the memory of a night when two orphans kept vigil together. Not alone, never truly alone. The revelation sat in my chest like a small sun, warming places that had been cold for 7 years. I stayed with Boone another day, partly because I couldn't bring myself to leave, partly because walking to Tombstone would take 3 days at least, and I needed to prepare. But mostly because Crow's ritual felt unfinished somehow, like there was something more required. That evening, as the sun sank toward the canyon walls again, I finally opened Boone's saddlebags properly. I'd been avoiding it, too much like grave robbing, but practicality demanded I take what I could use. Most of it was predictable: ammunition, hardtack, jerky that was mostly salt and hope, a spare horseshoe that made my throat tight, my shaving, a kit unused for days, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, papers I'd forgotten I carried, my discharge from the cavalry, a deed to land I'd never claimed, and 3 letters from Mary, the only ones I'd saved. I unfolded the oldest, though I knew every word by heart. My dearest Jake, Timothy asked about you again today. I told him you're helping make the country safe, that you'll come home with stories of adventure. He wants to know if you've seen any bears. I told him probably not, but maybe wolves. He seemed satisfied with wolves. The farm is well. The corn is coming in strong despite the dry spell. Mrs. Henderson helped me with the harvest. Her boys are nearly grown now, strong backs and willing hearts. We'll have enough to see us through winter and some to sell besides. I dream of you every night. Sometimes you're as you were when you left, young and certain. Sometimes you're older, marked by what you've seen. But always you come home to us. Always you take me in your arms and say the waiting is over. Come home to us, my love. Whatever you've done, whatever you've seen, we will heal it with love and time and the laughter of your son, who grows more like you every day. All my love, Mary. The paper was soft with handling, some words blurred by old tears. I'd read it 100 times in those first months after, looking for clues I'd missed, warnings I'd ignored. But there was nothing, just love and hope and the ordinary faith that tomorrow would come. I folded it carefully, returned it to its oilcloth. Then I noticed something else in the saddlebag, a folded paper I didn't recognize. Newer than the rest tucked behind the ammunition. My hands trembled as I opened it. The writing was shaky, unschooled. To who finds this, if you read this, means I'm gone. Horse named Boone. Man named Jake Wheeler, good man. Sad man, fought in war, lost family to fever, 7 years riding together. Please help him. He don't ask for nothing but needs everything. Still got love in him but buried deep. Worth saving. Someone who knows the letter was unsigned, undated, but at the bottom was a small drawing. A crow in flight. You little bastard, I whispered. When did you... But of course I knew when. One of those moments when I dozed when he'd moved, through the camp like smoke. He'd written this child who I'd assumed couldn't write, and tucked it away where someone would find it if what? If I died out here? If I gave up? If the grief finally won? I read it again. Still got love in him but buried deep. Worth saving. A 10-year-old child had seen that in one night, had believed it enough to write it down, to leave evidence for whoever came after. This boy who'd lost everything still believed I was worth saving. The sun was setting now, painting everything in shades of endings. But for the first time in 7 years, I watched it without thinking of death. Instead, I thought of Crow out there somewhere, making his lonely camp, carrying his wooden horse and his memories and his fierce, stubborn life. I thought of Mary and Timothy, not as weights dragging me toward the grave, but as lights that had blessed me, however briefly. I thought of Boone, who'd carried me faithfully until the very end. And I thought of tomorrow, walking to Tombstone, finding work, living, not just surviving. The possibility of it sat strange in my chest, like wearing a shirt that didn't quite fit yet. "All right," I said to the cooling air. "All right." That night I dreamed for the first time in months. Real dreams, not the nightmares that usually came calling. I was sitting by a river, not the dry washes of Arizona, but a real river, green and slow. Boone grazed nearby, whole and healthy, occasionally raising his head to check on me. The sun was warm but not harsh, the grass soft beneath me. "Been waiting for you." I turned to find Timothy sitting beside me, but not as I'd last seen him. This was Timothy grown, maybe 15, 16, the age he'd never reached. He had Mary's eyes, but my jaw, stubborn and set. "This isn't real," I said. "Does it matter?" He grinned, and it was pure mischief, pure boy. "You're here, I'm here, that's real enough." "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have been there. Should have caught the fever and died too." Timothy shook his head. "That what you think Ma would have wanted? Both of us gone? I could have helped, could have nothing." His voice was gentle but firm. "Wasn't your fault, Pa. Wasn't anybody's fault. Sometimes people just die." We sat in silence, watching Boone graze. The peace of it was almost painful. "Met your friend," Timothy said eventually. "The boy with the marks." "Crow? That what he told you his name was?" Timothy laughed. "He's got lots of names, depends on who's asking. You're saying he was, what, an angel, a spirit? I'm saying he was exactly what you needed, exactly when you needed it." Timothy plucked a grass stem, twirled it between his fingers. "Ma sends her love, by the way. Says to tell you the corn came up real nice this year." "This year? But time's different here. Everything's different here." He stood, brushed off his pants. "You should go, sun's coming up." "Wait." But the dream was already fading, the river dissolving into desert, Timothy aging backward into the child I'd lost. The last thing I heard was his voice, distant as wind. "Live, Pa, that's all we want, just live." I woke to find the eastern sky lightning and tears on my face. But they weren't the bitter tears of grief. They were something else, something I didn't have words for yet. I sat up, the blanket still around my shoulders, and looked at Boone's body. The white stones caught the pre-dawn light, seeming to pulse with their own rhythm. And for the first time, I could imagine leaving him here. Not abandoning, completing. His journey was done. Mine apparently was not. I broke my fast with the last of the jerky, washed it down with water that tasted of leather and distance. Packed what I could carry, left what I couldn't. The saddle I positioned as a kind of monument visible from the trail. Someone might need it. Someone always needed something out here. The carved feather hung heavy at my belt as I assembled my meager pack. Crow's blanket rolled tight, ready for the road. Mary's letters safe in their oilcloth. Ammunition because the world was what it was. And Crow's letter, that testament of faith from a child who'd seen too much but still believed in saving broken men. The sun cleared the canyon walls as I stood. To go. I looked back at Boone one last time, surrounded by his circle of white stones, already becoming part of the landscape. The vultures would come, the coyotes. The slow work of returning to Earth would begin, but that seemed right now, natural, part of something larger than my grief. "Thank you," I said, to Boone, to Crow, to whatever forces had conspired to keep me breathing when breathing seemed pointless. Thank you. Then I turned and began walking toward Tombstone, toward whatever came next. The carved feather swayed with each step, catching the light. The blanket was warm across my shoulders, and somewhere out there, a native boy carried a wooden horse, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply witnessing another's pain. 3 days walk to Tombstone, 3 days to think, to plan, to remember how to be human among humans again. The first day was the hardest, not physically, though my body protested the unaccustomed walking. But mentally, each step away from Boone felt like betrayal. I stopped frequently looking back, half expecting to see him following. Once I almost turned around, convinced I'd heard his familiar nicker, but it was just the wind through the rocks, playing tricks on a man too used to company. The second day was better. The rhythm of walking settled into my bones, and I found myself noticing things I'd missed while mounted. Lizard tracks in the sand, the way certain cacti bloomed despite the drought. Small beauties I'd been too grief-blind to see. I made camp that night by a seep spring, barely enough water to fill my canteen, but precious as gold. As I sat by my small fire, wrapped in Crow's blanket, I found myself talking. Not to anyone in particular, maybe to Boone, maybe to the memory of Mary and Timothy, maybe to Crow wherever he was. Made it 2 days, I said to the darkness. Didn't think I would, kept wanting to turn back, to sit with you until, well, but I didn't. That's something, isn't it? The fire popped and settled, sending sparks toward stars that seemed friendlier than I remembered. I'm going to find work in Tombstone. Nothing fancy. I can tend bar, work horses, ride shotgun if they need it. Save some money. Maybe. I paused, hardly daring to voice it. Maybe find some land, nothing big, just enough for a small place, somewhere to stop running. It was the first time I'd thought beyond the next day, the next job, the next bottle, the possibility of a future. Not the future I'd planned with Mary, but a future nonetheless, sat strange and fragile in my chest. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Me settling down, you always preferred a good pasture to the trail. I smiled, remembering Boone's enthusiastic rolling whenever we stopped somewhere with good grass. Maybe I'll get another horse, not to replace. You and nothing could, but for company. Would that be all right? The night gave no answer, but that was answer enough. The dead didn't begrudge the living their choices. That was a weight only the living carried. I pulled out the carved feather, studied it in the firelight. Such delicate work from such young hands. How long had Crow carried it? Why give it to me, a stranger who'd done nothing but sit by his fire and share his grief? But maybe that was enough. Maybe sometimes just sitting with someone's pain, acknowledging it without trying to fix it, was all we could do for each other. Crow had given me that gift. Witness without judgment, presence without demand. The least I could do was carry it forward. The third day, I saw Tombstone rising from the desert, like a promise or a threat. The silver mines had made it rich, and riches drew people like honey drew flies. There would be work there and trouble, and probably more ghosts, but also life. Messy, complicated, human life. I stopped at the edge of town, suddenly aware of how I must look. 3 days of dust, grief-hollowed, talking to myself, not exactly employment material. But then I touched the carved feather, felt Crow's blanket on my shoulders, remembered a child's faith that I was worth saving. Squared my shoulders and walked into town. Tombstone was everything I'd heard and worse. The streets teemed with miners, gamblers, whores, merchants and dreamers. The air rang with hammers on anvils, horses neighing, men shouting in 6 languages. After 7 years of mostly silence, it was overwhelming. I found a bathhouse first, used one of my 3 silver dollars for hot water and soap, for the luxury of washing away days of dust and grief. The man who emerged from that bath wasn't new, couldn't wash away 7 years that easy. But he was cleaner. That was a start. Next, a barber. My hair had grown wild, my beard worse. The barber chattered as he worked, filling me in on town. Gossip I didn't care about, but his voice was soothing, human noise without requiring response. "New in town?" he asked, scissors flashing. "Yes." "Looking for work?" "Yes." "Try the Oriental. Virgil Earp tends bar there, fair man, if you keep your nose clean. Or the livery stables, always need men who know horses." I paid him with my second dollar, left a nickel tip that made him smile. $2 left. Enough for a few meals, maybe a room for a night. After that I'd need work or I'd need to move on. The Oriental Saloon was exactly what I'd expected. Noise and smoke and the sharp smell of whiskey. I'd avoided such places for years, knowing how easy it would be to crawl into a bottle and never come out. But bartending was work I could do, and beggars couldn't be choosers. Virgil Earp was older than I'd expected, with the steady gaze of a man who'd seen enough trouble to recognize it coming. He looked me over with professional assessment. "You drink?" "Not anymore," I said, which was mostly true. "Fight? Not unless I have to." "Can you work?" "Yes." He named a wage, not generous, but fair. "Start tonight. 6 to close. Any trouble, you call for me or my brothers. Don't try to handle it yourself." "Yes, sir." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You serve in the war?" "Cavalry, 3rd Michigan." Something in his face softened slightly. "First, Michigan Infantry, long time ago now." "Yes, sir, long time ago." I worked that night and the next and the next. Poured whiskey for miners, celebrating strikes and mourning dry holes. Listened to stories I'd heard 100 times in 100 towns. Kept my mouth shut and my hands busy. The work was good. For me, mindless enough to let me think, demanding enough to keep me present. And there were moments, small ones, that reminded me why I'd walked to town instead of following Boone into whatever comes after. A young miner, barely Timothy's age if he'd lived, homesick and trying not to cry in his beer. I poured him coffee instead, told him about a boarding house that served decent food. He left steadier than he'd arrived. An old woman looking for her son, showing a daguerreotype to anyone who'd look. I'd seen him, dealt cards at the Crystal Palace, reunited them, watched her cry on his shoulder while he looked embarrassed and pleased. Small things. Nothing that would change the world. But Crow had shown me that small things mattered. A blanket on cold shoulders, a song for the dead, witness to grief. I'd been in Tombstone a month when he walked into the Oriental. I was wiping down the bar, preparing for the evening rush, when the doors swung open to admit a small figure. My hands stilled on the glass I was polishing. It couldn't be. The odds of him finding me in this sprawling town, of walking into this particular saloon. But it was. Crow stood in the doorway looking exactly as he had that night, thin, watchful, old beyond his years. His eyes found mine immediately, and that rare smile transformed his face. "Jesus Christ," Virgil muttered beside me. "Apache kid, what's he doing here?" "He's not Apache," I said without thinking. "And I know him." Crow walked to the bar with that same silent grace, ignoring the stares and mutters from early drinkers. He looked good, better fed than before, wearing newer clothes. Someone had been caring for him, or he'd been caring for himself better. "Hello, Crow," I said. He smiled wider, made that flying gesture I remembered. Then, to my complete shock, he spoke. His voice was rough, unused, but the words were clear. "Hello, Jake Wheeler." I nearly dropped the glass. "You can talk?" He shrugged, pointed to his throat, made a gesture I interpreted as sometimes. Then he pulled out a small slate and chalk. Tools. I recognized from missionary schools. Wrote quickly, "Learning mission school, don't like it but useful." "You're in school?" A nod. He wrote more. "Sister Catherine says I need words for white world. Rather have silence, but she feeds me." I laughed. Actually laughed. Practical. I can respect that. This a friend of yours?" Virgil had relaxed slightly but still watched Crow with lawman's eyes. "Yes, he helped me when Boone died." Understanding dawned in Virgil's face. I'd mentioned losing my horse when he'd asked why I'd walked to town. "Ah, well then, what'll you have, young man? Sarsaparilla?" Crow shook his head, wrote water, and to talk to Jake. "Go ahead," Virgil said. "Take a break. Lord knows you've earned it." I led Crow to a corner table, away from the curious eyes. We sat facing each other, and I was struck again by how young he was. The ancient sadness was still there, but tempered, now by something else. Hope, maybe, or just the resilience of youth. "How did you find me?" He wrote, "Followed the road. Asked about sad man with carved feather. Not many. I touched the feather at my belt. I'd taken to wearing it always, a reminder of that night. But why? Why come looking?" This took longer to write. He filled the slate, erased, wrote again, finally showed me, "Wanted to know if you lived, if the blanket helped, if you found reason to keep walking." I did, all of those things. I studied him, but that's not the only reason. That smile again. He erased and wrote, "Smart man. Sister Catherine says I need job in town. Summer work. You know horses. I know horses. Maybe you teach me white ways with them. You want to work at the livery?" A nod. Then more writing. "Not charity. Real work. Have to learn to live in both worlds now. Can't be smoke forever." I understood. The old ways were dying, pressed out by men like me, by towns like this. Children like Crow had to adapt or perish. It wasn't fair, wasn't right, but it was what was. "I'll talk to Murphy at the stable. He's a fair man. But Crow..." I paused, trying to find the right words. "It won't be easy. People here, they have ideas about natives. Wrong ideas, but strong ones." He wrote, "I know, but I survived 3 years alone. Can survive ignorant white men." "All right, we'll try." Murphy hired Crow, partly because I vouched for him, partly because the boy proved he could gentle a horse with seemingly no effort. Within a week, word spread that the native kid at the stable had a gift. Horses that kicked everyone else stood quiet for him. Nervous mares let him handle their foals. Even the judge's notorious stallion, mean as sin and twice as dangerous, turned docile under Crow's hands. "It's uncanny," Murphy told me one evening, "like he speaks their language." "Maybe he does," I said, watching Crow work with a young mare someone had brought in half wild. He moved around her slowly, never direct, always at an angle. When he finally touched her, she sighed like she'd been waiting for it. We developed a routine. I'd work nights at the Oriental, sleep mornings, then spend afternoons at the stable with Crow. I taught him the white man's way with horses, bits and bridles, shoes and saddles. He taught me, well, everything else. "You used too. Much force," he told me one day, his spoken words still careful but growing stronger. "Horses already want to work with us. We just have to stop scaring them into submission." It was a revelation. 7 years I'd ridden Boone thinking I was a good horseman. But watching Crow work, I realized I'd been adequate at best. He didn't break horses. He invited them into partnership. "Where did you learn this?" He was quiet for a long moment, brushing a gelding's coat to shine. "My grandfather, before the soldiers came. He said horses carry the spirits of warriors who died, far from home. Treat them with honor, they give you their strength." Do you believe that? I believe kindness works better than cruelty. The reason doesn't matter. We worked in companionable silence after that, but I thought about his words. Horses as carriers, of lost spirits. It was a comfort thinking of Boone that way. Not gone, just transformed, carrying some other lost soul home. The town slowly got used to Crow's presence. There were still problems. Drunks who called him names, kids who threw stones until their parents stopped them, but there were good moments too. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house saved him extra biscuits. Doc Goodfellow treated a cut on his hand and refused payment. Small kindnesses that added up to something like acceptance. "You were right," Crow told me one evening as we closed up the stable. "It's not easy, but it's not impossible either." "Most things worth doing aren't easy," I said. "Who told me that?" "Oh, right, a 10-year-old boy who wouldn't let me freeze to death." He laughed. Still a rare sound, but less so now. "I was 11, and you weren't going to freeze. Dessert doesn't get that cold. Cold enough when you're grieving." His face went serious. "Yes, cold enough then." We walked back toward town. Him to the mission school where Sister Catherine provided room and board, me to my small rented space above the Oriental. As we parted ways, he said something that stuck with me. "Jake Wheeler, thank you for seeing me as more than just native kid, for teaching me, for being," he paused, searching for words, "for being the first white man to look at me and see a person." Crow. But he was already walking away, uncomfortable with sentiment as always. I watched him go, this remarkable child who'd saved me from myself and felt something I hadn't felt in 7 years. Proud to know him, proud to help him, proud to be building something like a life again. Trouble came, as it always does, on a Saturday night in August. The Oriental was packed, miners spending their weekly wages, gamblers working their trade, working girls pretending to laugh at unfunny jokes. I was pouring whiskey and keeping one eye on a poker game that felt ready to explode when Crow burst through the doors. His shirt was torn, lip bleeding, and his eyes held that ancient wariness I'd hoped he was losing. Behind him I could hear shouting in the street. "Bars closed to Indians," someone called out. "Even pet ones." I was already moving Virgil beside me. We reached Crow as 3 men pushed through the doors, miners, drunk and mean, and looking for someone to hurt. "There's the little thief," the biggest one slurred. "Caught him stealing from my saddlebags." "I wasn't stealing," Crow said clearly. "I was putting your horse's medicine in them, the salve Murphy told me to deliver." "Lying savage," the man never finished. I hit him square in the jaw, all the rage I'd been carrying for 7 years focused into that single blow. He went down hard, and then everything exploded. Virgil fired his pistol into the ceiling, the universal signal for stop or get shot, but the damage was done. The fight spread like wildfire, not about Crow anymore, just the excuse everyone had been waiting for to let violence loose. "Get him out of here!" Virgil shouted at me, already wading in with his brothers to restore order. I grabbed Crow and pulled him through the chaos toward the back door. We spilled into the alley as chairs started flying inside. "I'm sorry," Crow said immediately. "I didn't mean, not your fault." I checked him over. Split lip, bruised ribs, but nothing serious. Never apologize for other people's ignorance. "They'll fire you because of me. Maybe, doesn't matter." And I found I meant it. Job's just a job. You're... What? His eyes were huge in the dim alley light. "Family," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "Your family." He stared at me for a long moment, then did what he'd done that night by Boone's body, hugged me quick and fierce before stepping back. "We should go," he said, "before they come looking." We made our way to the stable, where Murphy was waiting with a shotgun and a grim expression. "Heard there was trouble." "Not Crow's fault," I said quickly. "I know, saw the whole thing from my window. That fool Wagner's been spoiling for a fight all week." He looked at Crow. "You hurt, son?" Crow shook his head. "I'm okay." "Good, because we've got bigger problems. Wagner's cousin is the new territorial judge. He gets it in his head to press charges." We all knew what that meant. Native boy's word against white man's, only one way that ended. "He needs to leave town," Murphy said. "Tonight, before they sober up and decide to make an example. My heart sank. After everything, to lose him to blind hatred. I'll go with him, I said. Make sure he gets somewhere safe. Jake, no. Crow's voice was firm. You have life here, job, friends. Don't throw away for me. I had a life before, lost it. You helped me find a new one. I looked at Murphy. Can you stake us 2 horses? I'll pay you back when I can. Murphy studied us both, then nodded slowly. Hell, take them as wages owed. You've both earned more than I've paid. He went to prepare the horses, leaving us alone. Where will we go? Crow asked. I thought about it. Where could a white man and a native boy find welcome? Then I remembered something Crow had written that day in the saloon. Have to learn to live in both worlds. California, I said. San Francisco. Big enough to get lost in, mixed enough that people might not care. I've got a cousin there, or did. Might still remember me. And if he doesn't, then we figure it out. Together. We left as the town was distracted by the brawl still raging at the Oriental. Murphy had prepared well. 2 solid horses, saddlebags with provisions, even a rifle and ammunition. I put your things from the room in there, he told me quietly, including this. He handed me an envelope. Virgil asked me to give you this, said no hard feelings. I opened it to find my wages, plus a bonus I hadn't earned. And a note. Man stands by family. Respect that. Watch your back. V. Good people here, I said. Some, Murphy agreed. Not enough, but some. He turned to Crow. You take care of this old fool, hear me? He's got a bad habit of finding trouble. I will, Crow promised solemnly. We mounted up. Me on a bay gelding, Crow on a paint mare that reminded me painfully of Boone. But the pain was bearable now, softened by purpose. Ready? I asked. Crow nodded, then surprised me by speaking in his native tongue. A blessing, or prayer, or maybe just words that needed saying in his own language. When he finished, he looked at me with those old, young eyes. Now I'm ready. We rode out of Tombstone as we'd met, in darkness heading into uncertainty. But everything else had changed. I wasn't alone. Neither was he. And somewhere in my saddlebags, wrapped carefully, was a carved feather and a boy's letter of faith. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but it didn't seem empty anymore. It seemed full of possibility. Jake, Crow said as Tombstone faded behind us. Yeah? Thank you for choosing me. Thank you, I replied, for choosing me first. We rode in comfortable silence after that, 2 unlikely companions bound by grief and grace, and the strange alchemy that transforms strangers into family. Behind us, Tombstone blazed with light and noise. Ahead, California waited with whatever future we could build. But for now, there was just this. The rhythm of horses' hooves, the vast star-painted sky, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is simply the willingness to stay. We traveled mostly at night those first few days, avoiding the main roads when possible. Not that we expected pursuit. Wagner would wake with a headache and probably no memory of what started the fight. But caution had kept us both alive this long. By day, we camped in hidden arroyos or clusters of cottonwoods, taking turns sleeping and watching. It was during one of these watches that Crow told me more of his story. My name isn't really Crow, he said, whittling a piece of wood with the knife I'd given him. It's, he said something in his language, musical and complex, means he who flies between worlds. That's a mouthful. Crow works better for everyday use. He smiled. My mother thought so too. She called me Crow from birth, said I was always trying to be in 2 places at once. Your mother was wise. She was. His hands stilled on the wood. She died defending me. Soldiers came to move us to reservation. She said no. He shrugged, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. I was 8. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry, doesn't bring them back. He resumed whittling, the wood taking shape under his hands. But you know that. I do. We sat in companionable understanding. Two orphans who'd found each other across a divide that should have been unbridgeable. After a while, Crow held up his carving. A horse, of course. This one running, mane and tail streaming. For you, he said, to replace the one I took. I accepted it solemnly, remembering that first wooden horse he'd given me. I still have the other one. I know. Saw it in your things. He grinned. That one was my favorite. Carried it for 2 years. Why give it to me? He considered. Because you looked at Boone the way I looked at that carving. Like losing it would break something that couldn't be fixed. Figured you needed it more. You were right. As we traveled west, the desert gradually gave way to different country. Pine forests, real rivers, air that didn't taste of dust. Crow had never seen such abundance of water, and his delight was infectious. Can we stop? He asked at every stream. Just for a minute. I indulged him when we could, watching him marvel at water that ran year-round, at trees that grew green without jealously hoarding every drop. It reminded me that he was still a child, despite everything. In California, I told him, there's an ocean, water as far as you can see. His eyes went wide. You're lying. God's truth. Waves taller than a man crashing against the shore day and night. I want to see that, he said firmly. Even if everything else goes wrong, I want to see water that never ends. You will, I promised. And meant it. We'd been traveling 2 weeks when we hit real trouble. Not angry miners or territorial judges, but something worse. A gang of border raiders who didn't care what color we were, only what we carried. They came at dawn, 5 men with the dead eyes of those who'd crossed too many lines to ever come back. We'd camped carelessly, exhausted from hard travel, and they had us surrounded before I could reach for a weapon. Well, their leader drawled. White man and an Indian boy, strange traveling companions. We're not looking for trouble, I said carefully. Neither are we. Just your horses, guns, and whatever money you're carrying. Oh, and the boy might fetch a price in Mexico. Young slaves are popular down there. I felt Crow tense beside me, ready to fight or run. I touched his arm lightly. Wait, take what you want, I said, but leave the boy. He's my son. The lie came easily, protectively. The leader laughed. Your son? You breed with savages, do you? His mother was my wife, I said steadily. She died. He's all I have left. Something in my voice must have convinced him I'd fight to the death over this, because he reconsidered. Men like him survived by reading situations, knowing when violence was profitable and when it was just messy. The horses and guns then, and whatever's in your pockets. I handed over everything without protest, even the carved feather from my belt. But when he reached for the saddlebags, where Mary's letters and Crow's carvings were, I balked. Nothing valuable in there, I said, just personal items. I'll be the judge of that. He dumped the contents, pouring through with greedy hands, found the letters, started to toss them aside, then paused, opened one. Love letters, he sneered. Your dead savage wife? My first wife, I said tightly. She died of fever. He studied. Me, this raider who'd probably lost things too. Everyone out here had. Then, surprisingly, he carefully refolded the letter and handed it back. Keep your memories, old man. They're no good to me. He pocketed the few coins I had, took the ammunition. You're on foot from here. Count yourself lucky. They rode off with our horses and weapons, leaving us stranded in hostile country with nothing but the clothes we wore and a few personal items they deemed worthless. I'm sorry, Crow said immediately. If I wasn't with you, if you weren't with me, I'd be dead, I interrupted. Man alone out here is easy prey. Man protecting someone fights harder. They knew that. But now we have nothing. We have our lives, we have each other. Everything else is just things. I gathered up the scattered items, the letters, the carvings, even found the feather half buried in dust. Come on, California's still west, with or without horses. Walking. I'd done it after Boone died, but that was 3 days to a known destination. This was different. Hundreds of miles through uncertain territory with a boy who'd never been outside. The desert. We made maybe 10 miles that first day, feet already blistering in boots meant for stirrups, not hiking. Found shelter in a grove of oaks as darkness fell. No fire because we had no matches. No food because we had no supplies. This is bad, Crow said matter-of-factly. Yes, we might die. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment, then, still better than being alone. I laughed despite everything. You're one strange kid, you know that? You're one strange old man, so we're even. We curled up together for warmth. Crow's blanket, the same one he'd given me that night, our only protection against the cold. I expected to lie awake worrying, but exhaustion won. Slept like the dead until sunrise. Woke to find Crow gone. Panic shot through me until I saw his few possessions still there. He wouldn't leave without the wooden horse, now returned to his keeping. An hour later, he reappeared with his shirt tied into a makeshift bag. Breakfast, he announced, dumping out his harvest. Roots I didn't recognize, berries, even a few eggs from a quail nest. How did you... 3 years alone, remember? Desert. Was harder. Less water, less food. This place is paradise for surviving. We ate the eggs raw, chewed the bitter roots, savored the berries. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to keep walking. That became our pattern. Travel in the early, morning and evening when it was cool. Rest during the heat of the day. Crow would forage while I tried to fashion tools from whatever we found. A walking stick from a fallen branch, a carrying pouch from my torn shirt. On the 4th day, we found a road. Not a main thoroughfare, but a track that showed recent wagon passage. Roads meant people, and people meant danger or help, depending. What do you think? I asked Crow. He studied the tracks with eyes that had learned to read sign before he could read words. Family wagon, heavy loaded, maybe 2 days old. They might help us. They might shoot us. Both true. But we were making maybe 8 miles a day cross-country. On a road, we could double that. And we needed help. Real food, directions, maybe even work to earn supplies. We follow, Crow decided, but careful, see them before they see us. It took 2 more days to catch up. The family, husband, wife, 3 children, had stopped to repair a broken wheel. Their milk cow had gotten tangled in her lead and stood lowing miserably. Good people, Crow whispered from our hiding spot. See how the children help without being told? How the man works but watches for danger? They're scared but not mean. How can you tell all that? He shrugged. Same way I know horses. Body language doesn't lie. So we approach? You approach. White family more likely to help white man? I'll wait here. I wanted to argue but knew he was right. The world was what it was. If something goes wrong, I run. Meet you a mile west. I know. He'd survived 3 years alone. He knew when to fight and when to flee. I stepped out of the brush. Hands visible and empty. Hello, the wagon! Need any help with that wheel? The man spun, hand going to the rifle propped against the wagon. But he didn't shoot, which was a good start. Stay. Right there, stranger. Not moving, I assured him. Just saw you were having trouble, thought I might help. The wife appeared from behind the wagon, 2 children clutching her skirts. The oldest, a boy about Crow's age, stood with his father trying to look fierce. You alone? The man asked. I made a quick decision. My boy's back in the trees. Didn't want to scare you, all of us approaching at once. Your boy? Adopted. His mother died. I took him in. Close enough to truth. The man relaxed fractionally. You know anything about wheels? Some. More about horses, but wheels aren't that different. Just need proper leverage. An hour later, we had the wheel repaired and the cow untangled. I'd sent the oldest boy to fetch Crow, who came reluctantly but helped with the animals. The family, the Millers, bound for Oregon, were wary but warming. "You two are on foot?" Mrs. Miller asked, her motherly instincts clearly activated by our obvious struggle. "Had some trouble back trail, lost our horses. Thieves?" Something like that. She exchanged glances with her husband. "Where you headed?" "California. San Francisco, if we can make it." That's a powerful long walk." "Yes, ma'am, it is." Another exchanged glance. Mr. Miller cleared his throat. "We're going as far as Sacramento. You're welcome to walk alongside. Can't carry you wagons. Too loaded, but you could help with the animals. Spell me on the driving sometimes." "We'd work," I said quickly. "Whatever you need. And the boy Crow, he's magic with animals. Your cow's already calmer than she's been." It was true. The cow, who'd been fighting the lead all morning, stood placidly while Crow stroked her neck and hummed something low. "Crow?" Mrs. Miller said. "That's an unusual name." "It suits him," I said simply. The youngest Miller child, a girl maybe 5 years old, had crept closer to Crow. She held out a rag doll, shy but determined. Crow accepted it solemnly, made it dance, handed it back. The girl giggled. "Papa," she announced, "I like them." And that apparently decided it. We traveled with the Millers for 3 weeks. It wasn't charity, we worked hard. I drove the wagon while Mr. Miller scouted ahead, helped repair things that broke, stood watch at night. Crow tended all the animals, foraged to supplement their supplies, and somehow became best friends with all 3 children. "He's good with them," Mrs. Miller told me one evening, watching Crow teach her oldest boy to whistle like different birds. Natural way about him. "He's a good kid, been through a lot, but it didn't break his spirit." "And you? Been through a lot too, from the look of you." I thought about lying, but these people had been kind. Lost my family 7 years back, been drifting since. Crow helped me remember why living matters. She patted my arm. Maternal comfort freely given. Children do that. Show us the future's worth reaching for. When we finally parted ways at the crossroads, them north to Oregon, us south to Sacramento, Mrs. Miller pressed a small purse into my hands. "No, I can't." "You can, and you will. It's not charity. You earned every cent and more, but more than that." She glanced at Crow, who was saying goodbye to the children. "That boy needs a chance, needs schooling, proper clothes, and a bed. You give him that chance, you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." Mr. Miller shook my hand firm and honest. "You're a good man, Jake Wheeler. World needs more like you. Just trying to do right. That's all any of us can do." We watched them roll away, bound for their new life in Oregon. Then turned our own faces toward Sacramento, toward California, toward whatever future we could build from the ashes of our pasts. "I like them," Crow said. "Me too." "Think we'll have that someday? Family like that?" I looked at him, this remarkable boy who'd saved me with a blanket and a song. "We already do, just a different shape is all." He smiled, that rare, bright smile. "Yeah, I guess we do." Sacramento was overwhelming after weeks on the trail. Buildings crowding together, people everywhere, noise and smells and chaos. Crow pressed closer to me as we made our way through the streets, his desert-trained instincts screaming danger from every corner. "It's all right," I told him, though I felt pretty overwhelmed myself. "Just a city. We'll find somewhere quiet." The money from the Millers got us a room in a boarding house run by a Chinese widow named Mrs. Chen. She took one look at us, dusty, exhausted, clearly running from something, and asked no questions beyond whether we could pay a week in advance. "Bathhouse is down the hall," she said in accented but clear English. "Dinner at 6, no fighting, no drinking, no women in the rooms." "Yes, ma'am." She studied Crow with shrewd eyes. "Boy goes to school?" "That's the plan." Good. Education important. My grandson go to St. Mary's. They take anyone, even... She gestured vaguely at Crow. Different children. That night, clean for the first time in weeks, eating rice and vegetables. At a table with other boarders, I felt something I hadn't expected. Possibility. We'd made it. Against all odds, we'd walked out of the desert and into a new life. Finding work was harder. My cousin, if he'd ever existed in San Francisco, was long gone. The city had burned and rebuilt itself so many times that tracking anyone was near impossible. But I had 2 good hands and a willingness to work, and eventually that was enough. Started at the docks, loading and unloading ships. Hard work that paid poorly, but it was honest. Crow found work too, at a stable of course, but fancier than anything in Tombstone. These were carriage horses for rich folks, requiring gentle handling and perfect grooming. Evenings I taught him to read and write better while he taught me words in his language. We were building something, slow and careful, like constructing a house one board at a time. "We need a story," Crow said one evening, practicing his letters. "People ask questions." He was right. A white man and an Indian boy, no matter how we explained it, drew attention. "What do you want the story to be?" He thought carefully. "Truth, but sideways. You saved me when my family died. Took me in, raised me. All true, just not the order people think. My son then, adopted but son." "Yes." He looked at me, those old eyes holding new hope. If that's okay with you." "More than okay." I cleared my throat, unexpectedly emotional. "Be proud to, call you son." That became our truth. Jake Wheeler and his adopted son Crow. It didn't stop all the stares, all the whispers, but it gave us a foundation to build on. 6 months in, we'd saved enough to move to a small apartment near the stable, where Crow worked. 2 rooms and a shared kitchen, but it was ours. I built shelves for our few treasures, Mary's letters, the wooden horses, the carved feather that had traveled so far. "Home," Crow said the first night, testing the word. "Home," I agreed. That night I dreamed of Boone for the first time, in months. But now he was running free across endless grasslands, strong and whole, carrying some invisible rider toward a distant horizon. When I woke, I felt lighter somehow, like something had finally been put to rest. 5 years. That's how long we'd been in San Francisco when the letter found me. 5 years of building a life, brick by brick. Crow was 16 now, tall and lean, working as assistant trainer at the finest stable in the city. Still quiet by nature, but his silence was choice now, not necessity. The letter was from Murphy in Tombstone, forwarded through 3 addresses. Before reaching us, "Jake, hope this finds you well. Thought you should know, they put up a marker for Boone, right where he fell. Some travelers found him, were moved by the white stones, still there after all this time." Word got around. Now it's become something of a landmark. They call it Spirit Horse Canyon. Virgil asks after you. Says the job's still open if you ever come back. Town's quieter now. Wagner drank himself to death 2 years back. Nobody mourned. That boy of yours ever talks about the horses here. We still remember his gift. Hope he's using it well. Your friend, Murphy. I read it aloud to Crow, who listened with his head tilted in that way he had when thinking deep. "You want to go back?" he asked when I finished. "To visit maybe, someday, but not to stay." I looked around our small apartment at the life we'd built. This is home now. Good, because I got accepted. Accepted? He pulled out his own letter, grinning. "The veterinary college. They'll take me next term. Full scholarship thanks to Mr. Morrison's recommendation." Morrison owned the stable, had become a mentor to Crow. "I'll be a real animal doctor, not just someone good with horses." I stared at him. This boy who'd been alone at 8, who'd survived things that would break grown men, who'd saved me with a blanket and simple presence. I'm so proud of you. None of it happens without you. You know that, right? Without that night, I'm just another dead Indian kid. Nobody notices, nobody cares. Without that night, I'm just another dead white man, frozen beside his horse. Too stubborn to live, too scared to die. We sat in comfortable silence, two survivors who'd found each other in the darkest moment and chosen to walk toward light together. "I've been thinking," Crow said eventually. "After I graduate, I want to go back to the desert, to the reservation. My people, what's left of them, they need animal doctors, need someone who understands both worlds." He looked at me. "Would you come with me? Try to stop me?" He smiled. "Good, because I've got plans. A clinic, maybe. Teaching the young ones what my grandfather taught me, but with modern medicine too. Bridging worlds. Your grandfather would be proud. All of them would be proud. My family, your family, Boone. We're living the lives they couldn't." That night I pulled out the carved feather, ran my fingers over its familiar lines. Such a small thing to carry such weight. But it had traveled from a canyon in Arizona to an apartment in San Francisco, carrying memory and promise and proof that kindness could bloom in the harshest ground. "You know what?" I said. "I think we should frame this. Hang it on the wall. Not hidden away, but visible. Reminder of where we've been and where we're going," Crow added. So we did. Framed the feather along with one of Mary's letters and both wooden horses. Our history on the wall, not as weight, but as foundation. That's the thing about grief. It never fully goes away. But it transforms, if you let it. Becomes something else. Memory, honor, purpose, even joy eventually. I learned that from a 10-year-old boy who tucked a blanket around my shoulders and refused to let me freeze. Who showed me that being alone was a choice, not a fate. Who proved that family isn't just blood. It's who shows up when you're at your lowest and says without words, "You matter, your pain matters, and you don't have to carry it alone." Boone is still dead. Mary and Timothy too. Crow's family, gone. Nothing changes that. But we're alive, and we're together, and we're building something good from the ashes of all that loss. Sometimes that's all you can do. Sometimes that's everything. The carved feather catches the light from our window, casting shadows on the wall that look almost like wings, like something ready to fly, like hope, which is maybe the bravest thing of all. Outside, the city pulses with life. Inside, a man who thought he had nothing left to give reads veterinary textbooks aloud while his adopted son corrects his pronunciation of the medical terms. It's a small scene, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But to us, it's everything. It's family. It's future. It's proof that sometimes the greatest mercy comes from the smallest gestures. A blanket on cold shoulders, a song for the dead, witness to grief that says, "I see you, you're not alone, and you never have to be again." Sometimes the greatest comfort comes without words, just presence. And the child who gave me warmth reminded me that even in grief, we're never truly alone. If this story stirred something in you, remember, we all carry blankets we can share. We all have songs for the dead. We all have the power to witness another's pain and say, simply by being there, you matter. The desert is vast, but kindness travels farther than any horse. Pass it on.